I'm Kelly Wayment, and we are at Silhouette headquarters. This is kind of an impromptu class today that you weren't expecting, so surprise! We are going to make this really fun burlap sign. So I'm going to show you the whole process. This is a technique that I've used quite a few times where I'm applying glitter heat transfer onto the burlap, and so you can use this. So this is the free design this week, and you can use it for this Christmas project, but I've also used a different design to make it for a wedding project. You could leave it out of the frame or you can put it in a frame, either way. And so I'm just going to show you the process and you can do what you want with it. All right, so to make this sign, let me go over the supplies that you will need. So you will need, first of all, a heat press or an iron. And so if you're, you're probably not prepared to craft along with me, but the heat press you would set at 320 degrees to get it ready. And if you're using an iron, just make sure that you use like a cotton setting with no steam. That's always the case for heat transfer vinyl. We are going to use burlap, and your burlap needs to be big enough to cover your panel that you're using. So this is a tight weave burlap, and this is actually, I bought it as a table runner at Michael's, and so it's got a good tight weave, and it's big enough to do any project I want with it. And this is a flat canvas panel that you would get in the art section of your craft stores. So it's just hard and firm and a pre-treated canvas. And so that is what we're using as the base of this sign. And so your burlap and your canvas panel, those are your basics. Doesn't matter what design you're going to use. I am going to use glitter heat transfer vinyl. So a textured heat transfer vinyl like this glitter, it's pretty thick, and this is actually ideal for burlap. If you were to use a smooth heat transfer with your burlap, it might actually show the texture through it, which you might not want. So something like a felt or a glitter, or a flocked or a glitter heat transfer is ideal for applying to burlap. I've already cut a couple of pieces, so for this particular project I'm going to use a 9-inch by 12-inch piece of red glitter heat transfer, and then a 3-inch by 12-inch piece of white glitter heat transfer. And again, you would just adapt to your own colors for whatever project you are doing. We are going to cut both without the mat and with the mat, so have a cutting mat for your Cameo 4. I think the largest we're cutting is 9 inches wide, so you probably can. We're going to be just under 9 inches wide. I think you can do this project with the portrait if you want to. Let's see, so I'm going to use scissors, I'm going to use a hook tool, you're going to need some kind of ruler to help you with placement later. And let's see, I've got a lint roller that I'm going to use for a couple different parts. That's optional, but it will be helpful. And some kind of protective sheet for your heat press or your iron, because we're going to be doing this in 2 stages, so you definitely need something to protect the heat transfer that's being applied. And I think the last thing we need is a hot glue gun. I'm going to use a low temperature hot glue gun. You can use a high temperature hot glue gun also, but the low temperature for this project is probably going to be better because you're going to be gluing this burlap, and some of the hot glue will seep through and get to your fingers. So low temperature is probably going to be a little bit safer. All right, so I think that's it for supplies. The design that we're going to be using, like I said, is the free design of the week. And if you are looking this up later, it is number 389575. So we're going to go ahead and go into the software. We'll get a screen share going. Okay. And so let's just look real quick. If you're going to go find this in the store, I've just clicked on the store tab in Silhouette Studio and just go to deals and free. So if you're looking at it this week, if you're watching the video this week, here it is right here, Snowflake Kisses and Holiday Wishes. And so you can purchase that. If you are looking, if you're watching this later, the design ID number is 389575, and you can just type that in the search bar up here, and that will pull that design up for you. Okay, so I've already downloaded this. I've already purchased it, and so it's going to be in my library in recent downloads. Okay, here it is. So Snowflake Kisses and Holiday Wishes. I'm just going to double click on that to open it. And there it is open in my software. So I am going to recolor this red. So go up to your left, upper left corner in your quick access toolbar, and you can just pick a red color, and that's going to fill your design with red. That's of course optional, but I always like to work with colors when I'm working with multiple parts, and it just makes it easier to see. And now I'm going to create a design area that's going to represent the surface I'm applying this to. This is optional, but I'm just kind of giving you a peek into my design process. I'm going to go over here on the left and grab the Draw a Rectangle tool and just click and drag to draw a rectangle. And what I want to do is have this the size of my panel, my canvas panel that I'm going to use. So I'm going to make sure that this is unlocked up here in the scale section of the quick access toolbar. And I want it to be 12 inches wide by 16 inches high. And that's a little bit bigger than my screen right now, so I'm going to use this zoom tool to zoom out. So when you've got this double arrow zoom tool, you just drag your mouse up and down, and that's a really quick way to zoom in and out to your screen. All right, so now I want to fill this rectangle with a color, and I want it to represent my burlap, just for design purposes. And again, this is optional, but this is the way I like to do it, so I'm going to show you. On the bottom left, there's this little pop-out arrow that's Show or Hide Library, and I want to fill this with a pattern. So instead of using my pattern fill, which I could do, this is a faster way for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my file types as I'm looking at this library and deselect it, and the only thing I want to look at is the printable pattern section. And then I'm going to use my search bar to type brown, and this is going to pull up all of my patterns that are tagged or have a keyword or have brown in the title. And so then if I just click on a single pattern at a time, you can see over here it fills it in that rectangle that I have selected. And I figured tan stripe kind of is the look I want. So I'm going to shrink the library again. Actually, first I'm going to change it back to all file types, so next time I look in the library, I'm not just looking at patterns. So I'm going to hide the library again. And so now I have kind of this representative of my burlap as I'm getting ready to design. So I'm going to resize this main design to 9 inches wide. That is going to make it, I'll bring it to the front. If I make it this big, it's about 10 inches wide right now, which would actually look fine, but I know that my heat press area is only 9 by 12 or 9 by 13. And so I don't want it to be bigger than one press on the heat press. And so I'm going to change my design. This time I'm going to make sure that it's locked and change the width to 9 inches, and that'll change it proportionately. Okay, so that looks good on this size of canvas panel, and it will fit with one press on my heat press. Now I want to ungroup so I can access these snowflakes. I'm going to move it over here so it's a little less busy. Ungroup. Okay, and now I want to get my snowflakes turned white, and I don't want to lose all these pieces. So when I ungrouped this changed all of my the dots to my eyes and everything has become separated. So I want to be careful I don't move anything at the moment. So right now I'm just going to select my snowflakes, and this one has 2 parts to it. I'm not going to zoom in. I'm just going to hold shift and click on each of these snowflakes. I just know that that one snowflake had 2 parts to it, so I wanted to make sure I grabbed that. And right now, with the snowflake selected, I'm going to go up here again to my fill color and change it to white. And then I'm going to select this one that has 2 parts again and group it so that doesn't become separated. And now I want to group the red part. So the fastest way to group the red part is to go up here and select by color. This is an option everybody has up here at the top. Looks like a little painter's palette with a dotted square line around it. And I want to choose select by fill color. So if I click here right now on red, it's going to select, oh, and make sure that you don't have checked only shapes on media. Well, you could change it for whatever you're doing, but I have it unchecked, which is generally how I like it. So I clicked the red fill color, and that immediately picked all of the red part of the design and is ignoring the white part of the design. And so while I have that selected, I'm just going to click group. So now I have my red and my white, and I'm going to bring those over here in front of my brown just to kind of see what I think it's going to look like when I actually have it created. So at this point I can leave it as it is, or I have the option, because this is an awesome designing software, I can make some changes. So I'm going to move some of these snowflakes around a little bit. Only the red has to be constrained to 9 inches. I can have my snowflakes wherever I want. So I'm going to actually make it a little more vertical. So I'm going to hold my Alt or Option key if you're using a Mac and click and drag a copy of one of these snowflakes and drag it up. And then I'm going to click and drag, or hold Alt or Option and click and drag another snowflake and bring it down. And you can see that has kind of made my whole design a little more vertical instead of square to fit the space. I'm going to use the center to page. Let's see, nope. I want to click on my background and click on my red by holding shift. While I click on the red, that selects them together, and then I'm going to use the center tool and see if that looks good centered, and then I can move my snowflakes. We're actually going to be hand placing these snowflakes, so this is just kind of a visual trial to see where I like things. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so now I have my red ready and I've got my white ready. I have enough snowflakes so I know what I want to do. And I'm going to make copies to cut. So I'm going to leave this here on my page so I kind of have a guide for once my pieces are all cut out, I can refer to this. So for cutting, I'm going to do that trick again where I hold my Alt or my Option key and click and drag the red design over. And so now it's time to get our page set up ready for cutting. So if it's not showing, you can open the page setup panel, just upper right corner here. And I'm using the Cameo machine, so I'm going to have Machine Cameo. Cutting mat, we are going to cut this from heat transfer vinyl that's not placed on a cutting mat, and so I want to say none. It's really important that if you're using a cutting mat, you choose the correct cutting mat, and if you're not using a cutting mat, you need to make sure that that cutting mat selection says none. That has an effect in several ways as you are actually cutting, and so that's important. Now my media size, I'm going to set a custom width. I'm actually going to cut from a piece of heat transfer that's 9 inches wide. I told you earlier that I had cut it already to 9 inches by 12 inches, so that's where I input that. And your width, as long as you are between 9 and 12 inches wide, you can cut heat transfer or vinyl without a mat. Once you get narrower than 8 inches, then you need to use a mat. So if you're like cutting scraps or something, or you're just using smaller pieces to save material, make sure that you are using a mat if you're narrower than 9 inches. All right, so next thing to do, since it's heat transfer and we cut the back side of heat transfer, we need to flip this horizontally so it's in reverse since we're going to be cutting the back side. So if you just right click and choose flip horizontally, that is going to give you a mirror image, which is exactly what we want when cutting heat transfer. Okay, I'm going to fit this to the window so I can see it a little bit better. Now I'm going to use weed lines. This is kind of an advanced technique, but I use it all the time, so just bear with me. I'm going to create my own weed lines because things are tight together. I could draw some weed lines and edit the points to fit between, but this one's faster for me. So I'm going to choose on the left, draw a line tool, and I'm going to click and drag from the left side to the right side, and I'm going to hold my Shift key so it goes straight across. So I just want a line to go from one edge of the media to the next. And it's okay that it crosses on top of your text because we're going to fix that in a second. Okay, so I'm going to have it, I'm going to draw these lines to kind of divide these words apart. So I'll draw another line, drag from left side to the right side, holding my Shift key so it goes straight across, and one more line, left side to right side, holding my Shift key so it stays straight, and one final line that is below the design, and hold my Shift key to make it go straight across. Okay, and I could use my arrow key. You can use your arrow key to move these a little bit if you need to, up or down. But that looks good. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to select just those lines. And it's okay to group them or to make them a compound path. I'm going to group them. And then I need to send them to the back. They need to be underneath this text here. So click Send to Back, or you could right click and choose Send to Back. You've got a couple options for that. All right, so you're not going to see much difference because the text is red, but those lines are now behind the red text. So now what I'm going to do is going to open my Modify panel. So over here on the right-hand side, your panel that's got kind of a rectangle and a circle overlapping, open that and select all of those pieces, so the text and the lines. And we're going to click subtract all, and what that's going to do is cut a hole using the top shape to cut a hole in the shape underneath it. So we're going to cut away those lines. So you're not going to see anything different here, but I'll show you in a second. Select everything and group it. Okay, so let's take a peek over in the Send panel. Upper right hand corner, click Send, and I'm going to zoom in and make sure that those lines, see that? They're no longer lines going through the text. The lines were cut away right where the text is, and that's what I want. Okay, so now at this point I'm just going to bump this up. I'm going to use my arrow key, or I could just drag the design up towards the top. I just want to get that close to the top, just so I'm saving material, and make sure that all of my text design is still on the page. It's okay if the lines go off the side a little bit, that's totally fine. Okay, and now we'll get a practice shape ready. So you could do a star if you have Designer Edition Plus or higher. You've got these flexi shapes, and I like to use the star for a test cut. If you don't have that version, you can use just a letter B. So I'm on the left, choose my text tool and click on the page to get a cursor, and I'm going to just type a capital letter B. And this is going to be my practice cut to make sure that my settings look good. Okay, so now we are ready to go to the Send tab, actually to cut. So what I want to do first is only cut this letter B. And so I'm going to select the other part on the page, and here I'm going to choose No Cut. See how that is no longer bold and the letter B is bold? That means only the letter B is going to cut. So now we need to make sure we've got the right material settings. So choose Heat Transfer Glitter. These are in alphabetical order, so it should be pretty easy to find. Okay, Heat Transfer Glitter. And obviously if you were cutting a different material, you would choose the material that you're using. I do want to cut, and I'm going to use my auto blade, and then we will test with the defaults, and I'm pretty sure these are going to work. These have worked for me before. So blade depth of 3, force of 33, speed 5, and only that letter B is going to cut. So as soon as I get that loaded, we will cut that B. Okay, so we'll stop screen share for a second and move some of these things out of the way. All right, so we are using this 9" by 12" piece of glitter heat transfer vinyl. We're gonna, there's the sparkly side that you can see, and then there's a dull side. And I told you we're gonna cut from the back side, so you want the dull side facing up, because we're gonna cut backwards into it. And this glossy, shiny layer is actually a sticky backing that is a transfer tape. All right, and so now we need to get the rollers adjusted. So pull down the release lever and find your little button, and we're going to move it over to the 9" vinyl mark. So once that feels like it's locked into the groove, then we put the release lever up, and we can take this 9" wide piece of vinyl. You could also be cutting from 12" vinyl if you wanted, and you would just set your rollers at the 12" spot. But what you want to make sure is that your rollers are completely gripping the media, and your left edge of your vinyl lines up with the left edge of your or the guideline. Couldn't remember what that was called. And then just press the load button. And I always double check and make sure that that feeds in perfectly straight. This piece of vinyl may not matter too much, but if you're working with really large pieces of vinyl or heat transfer vinyl, you want to make sure that it loads in straight so it never goes crooked and gets off of those rollers while it's cutting. Okay, so that is ready. Let me make sure everything's set in the back. Okay, and we can go back to screen share just briefly. And when I click send, it knows I've got heat transfer as my material, and it wants to know if we want the software to mirror it, or if we've already mirrored it ourselves, we can send as is. And so since we went through the effort of mirroring it ourselves, we want to click send as is. And so you're going to get this pop-up whenever you have heat transfer selected as a material. So now when I click that, it's going to cut that letter B. Okay, so here's where we can see if our settings are right. Now with heat transfer, a lot of times it's hard to see where the heat transfer has come from. And so if you just kind of roll, or where it has cut, so if you kind of roll, you can find where that is cutting. And so then I'll grab my hook tool, and I want to make sure that that is, okay, so I'm getting, as I pull this up, I'm getting just a little bit of resistance of that center of the B wants to pull up with it. So that's an indicator that while this would be okay, because it does in the end release completely, but just the fact that it dragged and pulled just a little bit, my weeding is going to be easier if I give it just a little bit, a little bit more depth, or do something to it to make it cut a little deeper. And what I'm actually going to do, you have several options. If we're going back to screen share, you can see the force is already maxed out at 33. So I could increase my blade depth to a 4, but by increasing a full blade depth, that might then cut too deep. And so then I would want to back down a little bit on the force, and I could test again. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to give it a second pass. I have come to find that just a second pass is often, for me, the best option. But there's so many ways you can adjust this. So that's just something that I do myself, is add a second pass. It's going to add a little bit more time. We can test it again. So I'm going to go back to the design page and make another letter B. So I'm going to hold my Control or Command key and an arrow, and that's going to make a copy right next to it. I used my left arrow, so it made a copy to the left. All right, so now I've already cut this one. I don't want it to cut again, so I'll select it and choose No Cut. And so I could do this again, send that same, send this new letter B. I'm actually pretty sure this is going to work, so we're just going to go for it. If you're worried about saving material, you would go ahead and do those test cuts until you were sure you got it right. I'm just going to, in the interest of time, skip that part. So no cut on the letter B, and I need to turn this back on to cut. So I just chose cut option, and so that's going to cut this design and my weed lines. So I'm going to go ahead and send that. I'll get the pop-up. and we want to send as is. Oh, this also is going to tell me that I've got things going outside the cut border. That's because we have these weed lines that we made are beyond the cut border, and so I already know that is the case, and I'm fine with that. I know that the blade lifts up where it doesn't need, when it goes outside the cut border, and so I'm just going to click yes and go ahead and cut. So while that's cutting, do we have any questions that may be showing up in the chat? Okay. All right, so we will go ahead and just let this cut. Okay, so that has cut, and I'm just going to give a little peek to see if that has cut well. Yep, I think so. All right, so I can unload that. And we will weed this one while I cut the snowflakes. So I'm going to go back into my screen share and go back to the design page. So this red part is done, so I can just move it off to the side. Anything that's on the side of the media is not going to cut. This virtual page is what's important for cutting. All right, so now I want my snowflakes. And I don't want to use a whole page, and so what I'm going to do is just cut from a 3" by 12" strip of white glitter heat transfer, and so I'm going to change my page setup to reflect that. So still machine Cameo, cutting mat. This time I am going to choose Cameo, and this time my media size, I want it to be 12 inches wide and 3 inches high. Let me zoom out because it looks like everything has moved over, so I want to make sure I move those off again. Okay, so now I just need my snowflakes. So again, I want to leave this here as a reference, so I'm just going to hold my Alt key or Option and click and drag each snowflake over to my cutting area. Just one at a time is fine. And if you accidentally click the background and make a duplicate of the background, just undo. You've got a little undo button at the top, or Control or Command Z. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to fit to page. See, 6 snowflakes over here, 6 snowflakes over there. That looks good. Fit to page. I can close my page setup now. And I just want to make sure that the left one, here, let me change these, the line color darker so you can see. I'm going to choose a black line color. Maybe you can see that better. So I'm looking to make sure that the left edge is within the cut border over here, and this one's right edge is within the cut border over here. And then if I select them all and just choose up here with the Align tools in the Quick Access toolbar and choose Space Horizontal, that is going to spread them apart evenly. And I just double check and make sure none of those are going to touch each other. That's fine. So if you wanted to keep them, we'll zoom out again, if you wanted to keep them exactly in this same position, you could cut it from a 12" roll of heat transfer again, but all of this in the middle you're going to lose, or you'd have to try and salvage somehow. So I just think if you're trying to save your media, conserve your heat transfer vinyl, these snowflakes are something that are really easy to just hand place, and so that's why I've chosen to just cut them all together, and I'm just going to cut them in one piece and then snip them apart with scissors to hand place them. Okay, so this time I am doing a cutting mat, but I just want to make sure that my settings are the same. Same brand of heat transfer, so it should cut at the same depth. So let me show you, move out of screen share, and I'll show you how to load that on the mat. Okay, so take off the protective cover, and the side with the arrow is the side that's going to go in the machine. And we want to make sure that we set the rollers back to 12 inches because we don't want the rollers running on the sticky part of the mat if we can at all avoid it. So since we're going back to a 12" mat, we'll put the release lever down, push the button, and slide it all the way over to the 12-inch mat setting, and then put the release lever back up so that holds it in place. Okay, and then I've got my 12-inch by 3-inch piece of white glitter heat transfer, and remember that we're cutting from the back side, so shiny side goes down against the sticky mat and the dull side faces up. So we'll put that on there. Now a lot of times heat transfer or vinyl that comes on a roll, you are going to have a little bit of curvature, and since glitter heat transfer is really thick, it's going to try and roll up a little bit. So what you want to do with glitter heat transfer vinyl on a mat is use a good sticky mat. And if you don't have a sticky mat, you might want to put a little bit of masking tape on at least a couple spots on this leading edge so it doesn't catch on the machine. And that's really mainly with glitter heat transfer vinyl that I have found that to be a potential problem. And so a sticky mat is good enough for this one. So we would just load it in the machine. Again, the mat goes on this left guide edge and load. And so all I would do is press send again in the Silhouette software. I think in the interest of time, since I've already cut out these snowflakes and weeded them, I just wanted to show you how to get that set up. So you would go ahead and send it to cut and wait for it to cut. But let's move on to weeding so we have time for that and don't have to wait for that to cut. All right, so I think I am all done with my computer. I'll move that out of the way. Okay, so here are my snowflakes. Move some things. So these are the snowflakes that have been weeded, and let me show you, if you've never weeded heat transfer, let me just show you how that goes. So weeding, just like in a garden, you're taking away the pieces that you don't want, taking away the things you don't want. So if you have a hook tool, some kind of hook tool, needle nose tweezers are also a good option. So you can see that as we pull this extra stuff away, that our design stays in place. Now heat transfer will tear if you're too rough with it. So it's in some ways really sturdy, but as you're getting to some of these corners, you want to be careful that you don't tear any of your heat transfer. I actually did get a little bit of tearing as I was doing these snowflakes, but the nice thing about heat transfer, and especially the thick glitter, is that this backing is sticky, and so when I got a little bit of tearing as I lift this little skinny part, I just pressed it back onto the heat transfer, and you cannot tell that it was torn. It didn't come completely off. I was able to catch it in time, but you can press it back on, and by the time you apply it with a heat press or an iron to your material, that you won't see any tears because it's thick enough and it goes in exactly the spot you expect it, so your eye won't see any of those tears. All right, let's see. I have one that I already started weeding earlier that I got all the little bits out of, all my centers, so let me weed that one. So see how that lifted just a little bit? Just if you get some lifting, just press it back down. And you can see that those weed lines were kind of helpful because we're working with smaller portions of the design at a time. It's always a lot easier to work with smaller chunks with heat transfer and vinyl. So weed lines are really nice to break that design up for you. And if we have any questions, let me know. Glitter heat transfer is probably one of my favorite materials to work with. It's pretty and it's sturdy, and you can use it on obviously on fabric, but I've also used glitter heat transfer on paper. So like on holiday cards, you can use glitter heat transfer instead of paying somebody else to make your cards glittery and sparkly. You can do it yourself. Okay, we're most of the way done. You can see some of that is lifting a little bit because I'm trying to go kind of fast. And these weed lines that didn't go all the way to the edge, I told you that heat transfer tears fairly easily, so I'm just tearing that to break that connection. I just don't want to tear the design that I want to keep. It's fine if I tear the part of the heat transfer that's just going to get thrown away. Okay, we're getting closer. I'm always a little bit sad to throw this heat transfer away once I'm done weeding because it's just so pretty. Look at that. Okay. Let's see, one more little center to pull out. Now I can flip it over and see that, yep, that looks the way I want to. And so this extra piece, this is just extra that has no design cut out of it. And so I'm just going to use my scissors to cut that off, and I can save that for another project. And like you saw with doing the snowflakes, you can absolutely put that on a cutting mat and get use out of all of that. And again, you can put it on paper, so if you want to do it on a holiday card or something, that's a nice small piece. Okay, the other thing, if you are cutting your vinyl with scissors or paper trimmer, a lot of times I will just run my fingernail along that edge where I trimmed it just to make sure I didn't get a line of heat transfer that stays on the carrier, because that will transfer over to your design. Okay, so now we are about ready to move on to actually applying this. Okay, so we need to first get our burlap onto our canvas. So basically, if you, I don't know if you can tell, but with burlap, you're going to get a little bit showing through from your, whatever your canvas panel is. So I've just left this white, but if you wanted to paint it like a dark brown or something to just darken up the burlap, just for the look that you want, because this is meant as a painting surface, it's perfectly fine. But I'm just going to leave it white. So I'm going to roll out my burlap, and I want maybe 1 inch to 1.5 inches of border around around the edge of my canvas. And this just happened to work out that it was the right size. You know, this is what, 16 inches panel, and this is 18-inch wide burlap. If you're using a larger canvas panel, you would rotate it and you would have that extra space. So you could do like a 16 by 20 canvas panel too, which would be really cool. So this, I'm just going to eyeball it and cut about 1 inch on this side with scissors. And so now it's time to get, I've got burlap fibers all over. It's time to get your hot glue gun. And what we're going to do is apply one edge at a time. So we're just going to put kind of a squiggle of hot glue along the edge, and we're going to pull it tight and press it down a little at a time. We're not going to do the corners yet. We'll start with the sides. So hot glue, kind of press it. You will get some coming through the burlap, and I just rub my fingers to get that off. Last time I tried this, I used a high temperature hot glue gun and I could feel it, but the low temperature hot glue gun is a little bit better for this. Even when you touch it, it leaves a mess on your fingers, but it really doesn't burn you unless you're really sensitive. So you could probably find a way to, you know, maybe use a brayer or some kind of tool to roll that on there if you're worried about burning your fingers. Okay, I'm going to turn that around and kind of stretch it and do the opposite side. So we're basically just going to do this with with every side until it's ready, until it's all glued down. And this does use quite a bit of hot glue, so make sure you've got extra. And I've done this same process with other fabrics. I like the burlap look, but you can use a canvas panel with other fabrics too. It works out really nicely. Okay, I'm going a little bit fast, so I might get a couple lumps, so make sure that you are going slow enough yourself when you do that, so you can make sure you don't get any weird lumps. I might go back and just add some glue to some of those spots. So I'm going to try and pull it tight as I'm doing this opposite side. Okay, we're getting close to the corners. So if you are just doing this burlap just as a standalone, like my little sample piece, where you would just stick it on an easel or something, you can do the corners the way I'm going to show you. If you want to stick this in a frame, this corner can get a little bit bulky, and so if you're going to stick it in a frame, I would actually just take scissors and trim. Let me show you. I'll do one that way so you can see. So I'm just going to take scissors and trim most of that. And then you're just going to make sure that you've got glue down there. Try and get it as flat as possible. So if you're trying to put it in a frame, you would do something to reduce the bulk. I'm not going to worry about it with this one that I'm just going to have standalone. So just drag some glue up there and then fold it over, kind of makes a triangle. And if you're really worried about looks, then spend a little bit more time than I am. But basically, I'm just pressing that triangle down. Okay, so now that is just the burlap by itself. Before I try and put my heat transfer vinyl on it, there's a couple of things I want to do. One is to use a lint roller and run it along there to take some of that extra fiber off. I just don't want anything to interfere with the heat transfer sticking completely. So it's really fibrous, so I'm going to run it over a couple of times. The other thing I want to do is make sure that my heat press is the right thickness for, move that down. Actually, I'm going to move this. I'm going to be using that as a reference in a second. So I'm going to make sure that my heat press is the right thickness. Right now, it's not going to hurt anything to just place the heat press down on this. So I want kind of a medium pressure, and I can't push that all the way down. So I need to adjust it, loosen it up. Okay, that feels pretty good. Maybe tighten it just a tiny bit. You want it to be not super easy to press down, but also not difficult to press down. Okay, so let's see. Let's get this ready to go. So I'm going to use this as a reference. And this is where if you have your design the way you want it in Silhouette Studio, then you would refer to that to kind of remember how you had it as you planned it out for placement. But basically, we're just going to center this. I'm going to make sure it's goes right. It's not crooked. And then if you're using a ruler, you kind of want to get your edges to be even. So looks pretty good. I'm going to move it to the left just a tiny bit. So my furthest edge over here, I want to kind of be the same distance as my furthest edge over here. Okay, check one more time. Make sure that doesn't look crooked. Oh, so my snowflakes, since they'll be going on second, they will kind of be able to draw your eye. So if you've got it too far one way or the other, it's really okay in this design because you'll be able to use those snowflakes to kind of place them for visual balance. So I think that looks pretty good. So I want to press this on my heat press for, I'll check my notes, I believe it's 15 seconds. Yep. And I don't want to press directly on this plastic. Let's see, I want to make sure that my full design is going to be pressed. I'm just trying to make sure that that will all be covered at once. And so I'm going to use a protective sheet. You could use a piece of parchment paper also, but I have this protective sheet for heat presses, and so that's what I'm going to use. I have my timer set for 15 seconds, and it's at 320 degrees. Just making sure that full design is getting pressed. And so 15 seconds. If you're using an iron, you just want to make sure that every section gets pressed for 15 seconds. Well, probably longer than that with an iron. The heat press is a little more efficient. Okay. This one likes kind of a warm peel, so I'm going to let it sit for just a few seconds before I start to pull the backing away. That seems to be sticking. I'm just going slowly to make sure that the carrier sheet moves, but the glitter heat transfer stays in place. Okay, that's good. And so now our snowflakes. We're going to hand place these, so I'm just going to snip them apart. Don't cut the snowflake itself, just the carrier sheet. We are almost done. This part goes fast. Okay, I'm going to just use my guide, what I'd already decided I liked earlier. And it doesn't have to be, you can change your mind, of course, what you decided earlier. Okay, so I'm going to look at those and see and make any adjustments if I think they need to be moved up or down or in or out. And the last step is just to make sure that none of the backing lays on top of the glitter that's already there. That could cause either lifting so this doesn't get a full press, or it might leave a little mark on your heat transfer that's already there. And so I'm just going to snip it away in any place that's covering heat transfer that's already there. Without cutting through my snowflakes. Okay, take one last look. I'm just going to move the last little millimeter off of there. Okay, so heat press again. Now this time, the red fit the 9x12 section. The snowflakes are a little bit bigger, so I'm going to do half of the design at a time. So I'm going to place it on my heat press, and it's going to catch 3 of those snowflakes the first time around, and then I'll be able to get the other 3 snowflakes after I rotate it. Make sure that's all in place. So 15 seconds, getting a little tilting here. Okay, 15 seconds on that. And it doesn't matter on the glitter heat transfer on this surface. You're not really at a risk of cooking it from doing a little too long. 15 seconds or 30 seconds in total for the red glitter heat transfer is fine. It won't hurt it. Okay, so grab our other 3 snowflakes. Okay, and these ones have already had a little chance to cool. That's pulling off just fine. You would just press it a few more seconds if the carrier sheet was trying to peel up the design, but it looks like the design is staying in place. And this isn't going to be washed or get wear and tear, so if it sticks now, you're great. It's not gonna go anywhere. Okay, so there is our finished snowflake kisses and holiday wishes. And I guess if we don't have any questions, I hope you've learned a lot with this technique. Burlap and glitter heat transfer on a canvas panel is a perfect way to do holiday decorations or wedding decorations, wedding gifts. Just a really fun technique. So I hope you have enjoyed it, and we will see you again.